Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine, thank you, and ready to deal with the world and
New
all its
crisis.
problems. And I think today we have slightly more problems than we had yesterday.
Yeah, I think so.
They have been building. Of course, one of my themes or theories is that the disintegration of the empire, the disintegration of the empire hasn't occurred. The disintegration of the republic started 100 years ago, and it's accelerating, and we're seeing it come to a crucial end. And that's why I've talked about, the bankruptcy, financial bankruptcy, and the moral bankruptcy. And all you have to do is turn the TV on. You see the moral bankruptcy very easily, and the financial bankruptcy is there too, because there's a lot of subtle economic things going on here, and we hear the rising up of the Marxists, and that has to be dealing with economic problems. And yet today what we want to talk about, though, is the violence, the riots. And I did listen to President Trump last night, and it's a real mixed bag because I understand his sentiment. I understand why he's appealing to the people who are outraged, and a lot of people who would like not to see any violence whatsoever are outraged when they watch the TV. And the trashing of private property and the stealing that goes on, it's rioting. And what are you going to do? It seems like there's a lot of things built into the system that prohibits some of the more market answers to that. Like, are you allowed to defend your private property?
Yeah.
No. If you defend your property in a proper way, you're liable to go to jail. But right now, the rioters, the very state, D.C., announced we're not going to prosecute anybody. So, I mean, it makes no sense at all, which means that people, if they know that is the case, it will encourage the rioters, but it will encourage the people who say, I've had enough, I'm going out shooting, and that has happened before. But of course, Trump understands this, and he does have authority. And his suggestion is starting to use the military, which makes me nervous.
Yeah.
I don't like that. We've dealt with this issue over the years. We had the Insurrection Act and the Posse Comitatus Act, trying to keep federal military out of state policing problem. But there have been excuses made and variations of those restraints over all these years. But the sympathies will be for it. There's no way you can say that they shouldn't come in. But I don't know if right now I see that California is begging for a lot of money.
Yeah.
And because they're having difficulties there. They tax people to death. They ruin their state. And now when the riots and the problems come from coronavirus, we need a bailout. But, the lack of bailouts and the ability to private owners defend their property, and not for the local policing officials. If you're going to start with some police activity, local should be it, but they should be firm about that. In the old days, there was a belief it was up to the sheriff. The sheriff philosophy is they were supposed to take care of things, and if they didn't have enough help, they were to deputize people and join in. But now, right now they call up the Guard, which is a mixed bag. It really isn't state, it's a federal organization, but then again, it's one step removed from the U.S. Army coming in. But I fear the expansion of the militarization and the nationalization of this because we've already had so much of it, and nothing works so well. I think some of the problems over the last 20 or 30 years has been the building up of the policing activity, whether it's the bureaucrats coming in or whether it was a tremendous increase with 9/11 of the control of our lives. If even back in the 70s, it was started with the policing of our financial accounts, and now with the coronavirus, tremendous increase on control. And we've listed them for so long about the things, the social distancing and the lockdowns and all these things. That is a bit of martial law set up by the states. But now things aren't going well, and they're talking about the military, and there's no easy answer that you can wave a wand and just say we need to do only one thing and everything will be okay. I don't think you can do that because the one basic fundamental flaw in the system is the immorality of the people. You know, I mean, when you look at mobs, you can't talk reason, and then that invites people with more authority. So we're in trouble in that sense. But it's not just because the coronavirus. It's not just because one policeman, killed somebody and deserves punishment. That I think is absolutely irrelevant to all this noise. I think that was the excuse for it, and it was an excuse even to bring to light some of the abuses of the police. But it's lost when the violence turn out like this, and we've tried to approach that subject over in the past with the militarization of the police department, and they can get us into trouble, and then it's hard to defend them, and it ends up in the streets. So I think that we're in for some more trouble, but I think what we should do is consider the fact that militarization of everything and martial law, we had a taste of it, just in the last few months. I mean, it wasn't the vicious martial law, but we have really, if it created how much mental illness over this time and people dying from not being able to get to the doctor, it was pretty wicked, and that sort of sets the stage for the government getting involved. They always make it worse, and they never learn from their lessons. And here, right now, I would think that it's going to be, what if they send, we have a lot of Army personnel around the world. What if they decide to send 200,000 Army personnel to quell all these riots, I'm afraid that it's going to be a big problem, but there'd be a lot of support for it too. So but I think basically if the morality of the people don't change and the understanding of why government should be moral, we're going to have a continuation of this.
Well, you've always said bring the troops home. This would be a weird way of doing it, but maybe it would work. I guess it might be harder to send them back overseas, but who knows? But isn't it ironic that, as you point out, in D.C., you cannot be prosecuted for looting, for mayhem, for all of these problems they're causing, but you can be arrested if you don't put your mask on, at least still. I think that says a lot about what's happening. But yeah, they've already deployed, I think, about 18,000 National Guard troops to, I think, some 29 states across the country as things do descend into total chaos. And it's not just crimes against property, and we're seeing plenty of that. We're seeing a lot of crimes against innocent bystanders. We're seeing a lot of attacks on the police. I think a couple of police have been killed. A lot of people trying to defend their property. But you pointed out, and it's a good point that you make, that we've already been told you're not allowed to protect your property. You're not allowed to protect your private property because people were forced to close their businesses and lose their livelihoods because of a virus. So of course you can't protect it when the mob comes to town. But the other thing I think it's worth thinking about, though, is the role of the media, and it gets rather sensitive. But let's be frank, there are plenty of white people and black people killed by the police each year. It happens all the time. But somehow there was this kind of tinderbox, a bowl of gasoline, and the media hit it over and over and over and underscored it and just fed fuel to the fire. And then we get to this point, and it just makes you wonder, what is the role of the media? Is it to tell us something that's really happening in a very significant way, or is it to somehow follow a political agenda perhaps, or a social agenda, and to motivate people and more to propagandize them rather than inform them?
There were the two major acts that have been passed through our history to try to restrain the development of a militarized federal government was the Insurrection Act, and that was written in 1807, and the Posse Comitatus was in 1876 after the Civil War. And they had been used. They were well intended, and it was both were mainly to restrict policing activities from a central government, and that was supposed to be a state government. And that really didn't prevent things from happening. And I don't think, from me looking at that and how they have gotten around it and the loopholes in there, I was thinking maybe the details of these laws would prohibit, or at least it would sound like it prohibits Trump from doing what he wants to do. But I don't think that's the case. I think there's so much precedent there, nobody's going to object to it. So I think that's unfortunately an open door for really turning the police inactivity over to the U.S. Army, and as long as this continues.
Well, you know, our friend Peter Van Buren has a piece in the American Conservative today, and he said that for the first time in months, there's not a single front page story on COVID. You know, it's been taken over. And the danger, as you point out, is right, because people are going to be clamoring for Trump to become more of a tyrant. And I think several people have written about this, and I think even Tucker Carlson talked about it in his terrific monologue last night, is that with things having fallen so far out of control, with the failure of state and local government to stand up and protect the people as they're supposedly doing, people are going to be clamoring for Trump to become more tyrannical, i.e. bringing out the military. They're going to be begging for it. And in fact, his opposition, the people most angry with him, may end up being people who voted for him, who wish he were tougher against all of this. That's sort of the irony of this whole thing happening.
Yeah, and of course, we don't know what the politics will be, but yesterday I suggested the fact that Nixon benefited by the riots and he was tough on crime, and Trump may end up doing that. But we have so much authoritarianism that we accept it, and it's happened over the years before any of the current crises come up. And that is, if you had a criminal go into somebody's house and they're robbing and threatening and have guns, and the owner shoots or wounds or kills them, that sometimes, well, let's say they don't kill, the intruder doesn't get penalized, and the owner gets a bigger penalty because he used the gun illegally. You know, he wasn't allowed to do that, and he overreacted. And that's sort of the setting that has been happening, and that's what the liberals believe in. And they're saying now, even when they do this rioting, we're not going to prosecute them.
We're not going to prosecute them. It's amazing. And, you know, we talk about the media and the role of the media in adding fuel to the fire. But I often wonder, you bring this up, Dr. Paul, you brought it up a lot when we talked about the COVID situation, but I also wonder about our foreign policy. You know, we have been pursuing a very violent foreign policy for decades now, certainly ramped up since 9/11 and the Iraq War. And it's really, it's ironic that U.S. cities today are looking like the cities that were liberated by the U.S. military, you know, just a few years ago or just recently, you know, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and et cetera. And you have to wonder when extreme violence becomes normalized in society due to a violent foreign policy, then how is it just, how much of a stretch is it before this violence comes to the streets and turns us into another liberated country?
Well, defining the principle of violence when it comes to government is sort of unacceptable, because we would see anytime the government's doing something that we can't do, that's a use of violence, because they have guns, and the IRS and the the FBI and all these things that they can do it, and it's violent, but it's legal, but not constitutional and not moral. So, and Bastiat has explained this so well. You know, the government should never have a right to do anything that individuals can't do, and they only can do it if they use force and violate and sacrifice liberty. So, of course, the modern age, especially since the Depression, the last 100 years, there's just been incrementalism where government uses force, and they're all forceful. This whole idea, and we talked about it, I think, yesterday, about the medical aspects of coronavirus. I mean, the government's not even supposed to be involved in the distribution of medical care. And here they're talking about using vaccines as a method of controlling us.
Yeah.
The monolithic state, and it's through a medical thing of they're racing to try to get this vaccine ready before the virus is gone. We'll find another virus is their attitude. But they use that for control, which is violence. And you know what suggestion I had? We dread the fact that they will have a vaccine that will be doing all the tracing and have all this information in and follow us every place that we go. And I've decided the compromise on this ought to be, let's use tracing on all politicians. Yeah. Anytime you get into office, you have to sign up and be tracing. We want to know what you're doing and who you're talking to. So, with tongue in cheek, of course, but it does sound like a pretty good idea.
Not a bad idea at all. And it is kind of funny that with all the contact tracing that they're talking about for us, why can't they contact trace Antifa, and find out what they're doing? But I wanted to switch gears a little bit, Dr. Paul, because we talk about mendacity and we talk about the media. I have a couple of clips to throw out there that are basically related to the main theme. But if we can do the first one, this just goes to show the role of the media. This is the Washington Post, I think, just a day or two ago. Coronavirus may never go away, even with the vaccine. You got to be scared. Embracing reality is crucial to the next phase of America's pandemic response. And then in the meantime, this is the Washington Post, of course. They love ramping it up. Look at the next picture. You go to this. This is what you talked about earlier. This is from May 31st. New coronavirus losing potency, top Italian doctor says. The new coronavirus is losing its potency and has become much less lethal. It'll never go away. It's going away. And here's another one that I noticed, Dr. Paul, and this is related to our main topic. Remember how all the governors, the Democratic governors, said you better not go outside or we're going to put you in jail? Now they're singing a different tune. This is from the Washington Examiner of today. Now they're all encouraging people to go outside. Democratic governors say they support large-scale protests, a reversal from mandating social distancing and lockdowns. Quote, I stand behind the protesters and their message, said New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Okay. Now you have to go out because you're doing the right thing. And then one more, here's the inevitable. Now that everyone's out, they're desperate to hang on to that narrative, the corona narrative. More than 19,000 new COVID-19 cases over the past 24 hours. Oh no, that sounds terrible. Until you actually look at the next chart, which is how many cases there are daily. And if you look at that over there on the right, 19 cases would actually be a decrease from the previous day. So that's how they manipulate media. The media manipulates statistics.
You know, the age of cameras being every place, and you know the speed cameras, which has met some resistance. They've been removed in some places. Cameras every place, though, and even if they might not be owned by the government, you know they'll always be accessible to the government. Just like everything in social media, those cameras are accessible to the government too. But you would think, so far, maybe I don't watch enough television yet, and it didn't get on the internet, about these bricks.
Yeah.
You know, truckloads. I mean, these are huge amounts of bricks that are stacked there. And some camera, where were the cameras when we need them? Where were the drones?
Yeah.
Somebody should have recognized or said, but I don't think. I'd like to see a picture, because why wouldn't they ask? You know, why who did this? You know. But it seems awfully strange. It isn't next to a building that's going up. It's just bricks. And they were in handy places. People, they came in handy when they needed to throw something. So that is pretty amazing that, you know, that has to be complicit with some authorities.
Something's happening, yeah. I mean, you and I, we talked about it yesterday, but we weren't really comfortable talking on the show about it because we weren't sure if there was some backing. But since then, we were watching, we saw something on Zero Hedge where there were pictures taken in several different parts of the country. I think even here in Texas, where there was just a big old pallet of bricks that were sitting there that happened to be along the route of the protesters. And it does make you scratch your head. And you know what else makes you scratch your head, Dr. Paul, are the masks. You know, if you are conspiracy-minded, suddenly everyone is Antifa. Because Antifa, you could always identify them because they're wearing masks. Now everyone's wearing a mask. It's actually the perfect way for them to hide in plain sight.
I wonder what the statistic would show if it were measured. I don't think they will. Is these mobs and the scenes of thousands of people milling together. I wonder if they're going to see a boost in coronavirus infections. I don't think they will, to tell you the truth. Yeah. They're outside and moving around, and the virus is dwindling in effect, so they're not going to have that happen. But I don't know when they're going to freely allow people to move around and people can return to flying airplanes. But they've warned us, the bad guys. They said, you will never go back to the way we were. In some ways, that's good. But in the one sense, if it's going back to normal activity and running your life as you see fit, that's bad. And I think that's what they're talking about, because they're talking about tracing and they're talking about quarantines if necessary. They're talking about mandatory vaccinations, and they're talking about everything I consider anti-liberty. Yeah. And therefore, everything that I hear about is going to make things worse. And in many ways, I keep harping back to the 70s where they started regulating and controlling finances. But this whole idea of a cashless society, you can't do anything on private.
Yeah.
But you're going to have something stuck in your arm where they're going to know everything about you.
Yeah.
So it's a really a tragedy that there's so little respect and understanding, or enough people who care, and yet the noise comes from, well, even the number of people out there. They're not insurmountable. I think the majority of American people say this is terrible, happening, but it's the numbers are out there, but they're being endorsed by the bad people. The media, you mentioned already. Why doesn't the media help us out to show us some of this activity?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that we have to keep doing what we're doing, try to expose what is happening, and people will have to finally take a stand. And sometimes the stand is prepare to take care of yourself, because if things really got bad, and there's it's a lot easier for people that live in small towns and rural areas and have a little ability to travel and take care of themselves. But what if you have a store in downtown big city? But a lot of times, we didn't see any pictures, but a lot of times when these riots occurred, I know in the past, when the dust settled, they found out that they burned up, they say, well, this is a racial thing. We got to kill the white people. But a lot of times, the radicals go in and tear up the black people's.
Yeah, the white liberals.
They've had some interviews
it.
with some black ministers and others, and they just totally disagree with this. I mean, fortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think the number one lesson, you say protect yourself. The number one lesson to take from this is the police will not and cannot and will not protect you. That's not what they're out there for. But I wonder, I don't think it's going to be easy for them to put this genie back in the bottle. I can't imagine any of these tyrannical governors that are encouraging people to go out in the street and protest, when the protests are over, saying, okay, now get back in your house, put on your mask, you can't do anything, you can't go outside. I can't imagine that happening. So I think really the riots have killed the coronavirus hoax, the hoax being, of course, the reaction. But I'll just close with a really clever tweet I saw, Dr. Paul, the other day, and I wanted to put it up and forgot about it. But this is a good one. This is Jeremy Boring did this tweet a couple days ago, and this is great. 1, instill fear. 2, lock people in their houses. 3, drive tens of millions out of work. 4, remove the pressure valves, sports, concerts, bars, theaters, lunch with friends. 5, close the churches. 6, dehumanize through masking the healthy. 7, wait. 8, strike match. And I think, that pretty much says everything about what's happening.
And I think you have finished up with an optimistic statement that maybe something good will come about this, and recognizing that they're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle, and let's hope so. And I remain optimistic that the message of liberty is so powerful and so beneficial that when the total failure is obvious, that people will come to their senses. If you look at monetary history, what we're going through in money right now is not getting much attention, but it's happened many, many times over the years. And the whole thing is they finally throw in the towel and they say, well, we better be honest with our money. I saw a little clip today. I don't know whether it's true or not, but right now, for the first time I've ever seen any article like this, that the Chinese have a lot more gold in their reserves than the Americans do, because if people have the gold, can defend their reserve currency. But we don't even know who and where our gold is. But the Chinese are capable of preparing for this, because they would like to be able to be the issuer of the reserve currency in the world, which would not help the world. But I'll tell you what, this system will need remaking, whether it's the monetary system, whether it's the medical system. This whole thing on coronavirus, it doesn't start with, just an unusual virus getting in and we had difficulty dealing with it. It starts with, socialization of medicine, the control of medicine by government. And this is what you end up with. Because if you ever wanted to think of the inefficiency of socialism, just think of what happened on the lockdown. And everything the do-gooders were doing didn't work. The opposite happened, made more people sick and didn't help them. So I think that people have to be aware of this and look to the positive side of it, and think that things good things can come of it, but you have to know what the fundamental is, and that is personal liberty and personal responsibility, and not dependency on the government. But we do have a right to defend ourselves, and when you depend on the U.S. Army to come in and sort it out in your backyard, that gets a little bit difficult. They blow up things more likely, and they're not trained to be policemen. And our policemen, we complain about a lot of them because they've been militarized and they've acted like military people. So, but I think ultimately the basic principle that has to be followed is the issue of nonviolence, no aggression. Individuals should commit to that, and then we would have a pretty neat world. I mean, but the individual has to come to that point. But right now, what we're seeing on the television is the principle of aggression. Get what you can and take what you can get, and get exemption from the government because we're special and we don't deserve to be punished. And that has to be reversed. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.